Okay, so the first question you get in the War in Asia paper is a 4-mark question, and for 4 marks I would suggest you spend about 5 minutes, and that gives you a bit of leeway at the end to go through and check, but it's approximately 5 minutes, so bear that in mind. It will always be phrased in the same way. It will say study source A in the sources booklet, which is in this case this one here, and it will say source A supports, or source A says something. In this case it says source A supports China, and it will always say how do you know. Okay, now what is it that they are trying to get from you here? Alright, it says explain the answer using source A and your contextual knowledge. So effectively there are 2 things you would want to do in this. The first thing for this question is you need to show how the source supports China. That's the first thing you've got to do. So you've got to look at the source and you've got to think to yourself, how is this source supporting China? So you've got to literally refer to the source saying, I can see that it supports China because it shows this, that and the other. Okay? And the second thing you need to do is this idea of, I'll call it CK, contextual knowledge. You've got to use some knowledge of what was happening at the time this was produced to explain what's going on in here. Okay, and I'm going to show you how I would do that with this particular source. So basically you can get about 2 marks for that bit and then a further 2 for that bit. This bit here, really, you don't even need to know anything about what was going on at the time. That's just about understanding the source. So if we look at the source, and here it is, so I'll have to move the camera around a little bit. So this is a poster published in China in 1951, and it says resist the US and support Korea to save neighbours and ourselves. So if I was thinking how does this source support China, I would say it's asking people to support Korea to save our neighbours and ourselves. So if it's ourselves and it's from China, we know that it must be supporting China because it's a Chinese poster asking people to support the war. Okay. The second thing is I try and maybe pick out something in the source that shows that it supports China. When I look at this, the thing that strikes me is that you have how I would describe this chap as a sort of heroic looking figure, heroic Chinese figure, and that is in direct contrast to this very unpleasant looking American figure down here. So there's plenty in this source immediately that jumps out that shows China in a good light and supporting China, and here you can see China, the heroic Chinese figure, stopping this very unpleasant US soldier, and he looks like he's about to sort of attack China there, doesn't he, with his bomb. Now what we would then want to do as our second thing is we would then want to try and explain, well, what was happening? What contextual knowledge can I use to explain what was happening at the time? So for this second bit here, I'd be thinking to myself, well, in 1951 we know that the US led UN forces were fighting China and the North Koreans in Korea, don't we? We know that was going on. So I've now used some contextual knowledge to explain the cartoon in front of me. We could also say that actually by 1951 the Americans, or in fact even before that, the US had gone right to the border, hadn't they, of China, so provoking the response from China. So I'm just using some knowledge to explain what was going on at the time, so that helps us to understand why this Chinese poster was drawn in the first place. We could, if we wanted to, refer to the provenance as well, and we could say, well, this is from China, so therefore we know it's likely to be a piece of propaganda designed to increase support for Chinese intervention in the war. So there's loads of contextual knowledge I've used there, isn't there, which would help explain this cartoon. Okay, so two things that's supposed to be really clear. You've got to refer specifically to the source and say, well, how does this source support China? What can I see in it? And then you've got to use some knowledge to explain, well, what was going on in China in 1951 that would help explain this. Now, you do not need more than a single paragraph for this answer. And the room they give you, if I just move away there, that is enough, if you're not writing too big, to get you all the marks. So they only give you a certain amount of space because you only need to use it. So do not write any more than that. Okay? You could easily get even less than that if you were succinct enough. Okay? So that's that first one.